You're listening to Fictron, the alternative fiction portal. My name is Bela Ogier. Today I'm joined by Izzy Sardi and Peter Daniel Berg. And in today's premiere episode, we'll be discussing the nature of the podcast itself, what kind of fiction and fiction-related topics we'll be covering, and what we hope the podcast can become. So without further ado, let's get alternative.
Once upon a time our teacher said, "You'll never break the rules that we define. But times are changing now, let's look ahead. It's time for us to read between the lines."
Okay, I guess I'll just get started. So, hi everyone, my name is Bela Ogier, and this is Fictron, the podcast where we examine strange, weird, unusual works of fiction. Just a bit about myself. I've been very interested in this type of fiction for quite a few years now, and I find myself talking about it with a lot of people, and so that's why I wanted to start this podcast. So, that's all I have to say about myself, I think, for now. So yeah, introduce yourselves, guys. Whoever wants to go first, go right ahead.
Izzy?
Hello. I am Isabella Sardi. Wait, I don't even know what to say, though.
I don't think any of us do, really.
Well, I'm a tarantula with internet access. That's all you need to know.
Yeah, so I am Peter Daniel Berg. You can call me PDB. I'm 6 miles tall and weighing in at an svelte 10 million tons. I'm a writer, a game developer, and a linguistics enthusiast. The only thing better than a bad pun is a bad bilingual pun. And my favorite color is blaze orange, or maybe burgundy. And I'm here to enjoy weird fiction.
Right on. Yeah, so I've asked the both of you to be on this podcast, as you know, because, I've known both of you for quite some time, and I know both of you are as into weird, strange fiction as I am, like, easily. Both of you were, my first two choices for this podcast.
Absolutely.
Aw.
So I guess let's just get into what the idea of this podcast is about, basically. So, I already said it's about looking at weird, unusual fiction. The reason why I think it's so interesting to talk about and why it's also important to talk about is because I feel like a lot of new age fiction, more experimental fiction, gets kind of set aside. I feel like it gets overlooked a lot, especially in scholarly settings, as being sort of not even worth the time of examining. But, the thing is, fiction has been evolving forever. It seems like for some reason a lot of people have started to see books as being this sort of default form for fiction to take, and it's like the archetypal, physical medium for fiction to have, even though books have not been around for very long in comparison to the vast majority of fiction throughout human history.
Only 600, 700, 800 years? Printed, certainly. Certainly there were handwritten manuscripts going back as far as the ancient Greeks.
Right, manuscripts, stone tablets, and before all that, there was just oral tradition for sharing fiction, so...
Yeah. Writing bars with bars into bars.
And so
Absolutely.
I just think it's weird that all of a sudden people seem to be content with the idea that books are, the final destination. And, I think that... we all love books. I don't think there's any denying that. And we're not trying to say books are bad by any stretch of the imagination.
But we don't have to defend ourselves to book likers either.
Yeah, that's true.
I personally hate books.
Oh, yeah, no, books are the worst. A book killed my dad. But so I guess, I'm hoping that this podcast can be a space where we say, actually, hold up, let's look at some of these stranger works of fiction that are not necessarily being considered as heavily in, especially in scholarly settings. I'm not saying this is a scholarly setting. It isn't, but I'm hoping it can still be a place where we can cultivate that kind of discussion and raise people's interest in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds good to me.
Yeah. So I guess, let's just start talking about, the type of fiction we're interested in, want to cover. So lately, I've been really interested in alternate reality games, or more broadly, unfiction, which are basically interactive stories that portray themselves as not being fiction, but being a series of real-world events that unfold through various videos, posts online, and other sort of crazy amalgamations of multimedia. And the idea is that it's portrayed as, it's like the ultimate form of role-playing, where it's not we're all pretending that we're characters. It's who's pretending. We are these characters. This is all really happening.
Like Lonely Girl 15.
Yeah.
Lonely Girl 15 was one of those old YouTube channels from way back in the day before they had changed their slogan from broadcast yourself. And it was a YouTube channel with a pretty similar premise, the idea being that it was a series of real vlogs, but they actually communicated a broad overarching narrative that people got heavily invested in.
Exactly. Lonely Girl 15 is probably one of the early, like, more famous ARGs I can think of, honestly.
And an example. It is probably one of the groundbreakers to show that YouTube could be used for alternative fiction.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I think that's another thing, actually, I think we'll be covering a lot is YouTube fiction. I mean, there's so much of it in so many different categories, like, alternate reality games, YouTube poops, which I would personally qualify as fiction.
Where there's smoke, they pinch back.
Yes. And then I really love any kind of fiction that makes use of the internet as a medium, like Homestuck. Oh man, I can't wait till we do the episode of Homestuck.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, shit, I met Izzy and I like basically met and bonded through Homestuck.
Oh
so
yeah, that is
shows
true.
you.
Really now.
Yeah, so that's what I guess I would say. Those are the things I'm really excited to talk about, just off the top of my head. I mean, there's a lot more, but I don't want to get carried away here. So,
All right.
yeah. So you guys, let's hear what you were curious to talk about.
I am also like really excited about talking about like any ARGs because it takes me a while to like find any, but like once I do, I'm like immediately invested. And like I have a really big thing for researching and like trying to go like as in depth as possible to like try and figure things out, except for puzzles because I'm not great at puzzles. But like the one specifically I can remember like getting like super involved in and like doing art for was like the Nettlebrook ARG that was produced by I think sorry, I don't have her name like with me currently, but the main sort of cast member was also the person who did the Daisy Brown ARG.
I loved Daisy Brown.
Yeah, it's just that entire group of people is just fantastic at what they do and creating narratives and characters, and I think they are absolutely talented and wonderful.
They really are.
You know, I've never heard of this. We'll have to do an episode on it.
Yes, absolutely. They're on hiatus right now just because of it like takes place in Michigan, and all of the like police act and like protest activity has been like sort of hindering, and the pandemic of course, but it was very cool as long as it was running, but I'm not sure if they're doing anything now, but I hope they are, because they're really cool.
You say it's all set in Michigan. Is it like a sort of Night Vale Scarfolk type of thing?
Almost, yes. It's like
Okay.
very specific to like a town there, but
Okay.
like a fictional town, but it's really, really interesting.
Okay.
When Izzy, when you said that that like the puzzle element was something that you were not as involved with usually when you engage with ARGs, I'm kind of with you there. I'm not gonna lie. I think one of the, as much as I love ARGs, I do think that a big weakness that some of them have is that they can be a little too focused on puzzles and like not focused enough on telling an engaging story at times.
Yeah, like especially when it comes to like decoding ciphers, that is like a huge part of a lot of ones that I've seen, but I'm just terrible at it.
It's easy to create and hard to solve, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the other thing, is a lot of the ones that have very difficult puzzles are not exactly approachable to a wider audience, which is one reason I think that, they're not as popular as a lot of other types of fiction.
Yeah, it's like, I'm not Ann Arbor. I'm my original character town, Bland Blarber.
I'm not Sonic.
On the note of ciphers, do you mean, strictly speaking, like a Caesar cipher where you have an alphabet transformed through some key into a different set of letters? Or do you mean more generally phrases and so on, messages translated through different media, like turning something into Morse code and then encoding it in a spectrograph and then hiding the spectrograph in the background of a song that's left on a USB drive? Because I like the latter kind a lot. I really enjoy that kind of disgusting messing with media transformations.
Oh, absolutely. I love like just hidden things within layers of things. That's like fascinating to me, and I like as such a visual person would never think to do that. So I love that.
It's true. it is fun. I do love when people find very creative ways of incorporating puzzles.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just think that they could do to make them a little more approachable sometimes.
Yeah, maybe like multiple routes in.
I mean, it depends on the story.
Yeah. So the kinds of fiction I enjoy, I'm coming at this from a pretty different angle from the two of you. I haven't really participated in any ARGs ever, to my recollection, except, well, there is one instance when I was a kid, and I don't know how much of an ARG it counts as, but there were these books called the Ology series, and I won a contest, which got me this cute little compass themed after the book series, which was about tracking buried treasure from clues hidden in the Piratology book. And that was pretty cool. I was one of 400 winners. And the grand prize winner got an actual, 400-year-old, authentic wooden compass.
Oh, shit.
It was like this big box with a floating bowl in it. Insane.
That's so cool.
It is really cool. That's only to my recollection, though. I have approximate knowledge of many things. But the style of fiction I enjoy the most is interactive fiction when presented through a more carefully crafted experience of a video game. I really enjoy, set literature, but I enjoy fiction that plays on the reader's assumptions of how to interact with it. I like when a piece of interactive fiction generally makes assumptions about the way the player is going to encounter it through a use of half of game design is psychology, essentially. And, I mean, I know the people throw around the word subversion a lot, and, we subvert expectations. Well, you don't want to subvert their expectations that it's going to be good, but what you need to subvert is their method of approaching the puzzle. And not even all the time. I'm trying to formulate this in real time.
I think I kind of understand. It's like when a story sort of sets up its own rules and gets the reader comfortable with them. Like Homestuck comes to mind, actually. Homestuck did this a lot, where it would set up its rules. Like, this is how this world works. This is the way things operate. And then immediately, once you were comfortable with those, it would break its own rules and say, actually, here's something new.
Not necessarily, because adding something new doesn't necessarily have to break a pre-existing rule. I think it's more about, lateral thinking, the way of approaching a puzzle sideways. There's certainly a lot of video games where there's exactly one solution, but for example, in Metal Gear, for instance, I forget which series in the game it was, and Metal Gear fans don't crucify me, but there is the one scene, for instance, you fight the guy who has psychic control over bees, and if Snake puffs on a cigarette, right, the smoke calms down the bees right before the boss fight, then the bees are less powerful. And it's out-of-the-box thinking like that is something I really enjoy because it engages the user in playing around with the expectations of the way the world works. And I especially enjoy, internal consistency is always more valuable than strict realism. I especially enjoy internal consistency when it is very strongly divorced from realism. When you have a completely alien setup to the world, but it still makes internal sense. There have been a lot of really strange games I've seen, particularly those collected on itch.io. A lot of these one-off indie games, and a lot of them are made by, a developer with no name on their profile. They're just anonymous. They have 200 items in their profile, all different games that they churned out each in 5 hours or a week. And there's no playtesting, no QA, no bug fixes, no settings, no hotkey changes. You get what you get, and it's a one and done. And it's just a bizarre experience born out of one person's brain. I wouldn't say I'm a big fan of collaborative fiction, if only in the sense that the more people you have participating in a canon, the less canon any one element can be said to be. This might be a bit of a controversial opinion, but take something like Star Wars, for instance. It's had hundreds of authors across its timeline, across its existence, starting with George Lucas and his wife. And to the present day, it's very obviously had hundreds of people writing involved in it. But the further back in time you go, the more canon things are, as they were established earlier. So because fewer writers were involved at the time lightsabers were created, lightsabers are in a sense more canon than Ahsoka Tano is, even though Ahsoka Tano is a pretty cool character. And this is a weird way to look at it, but the way I would generally phrase it is that collaborative canons are more collaborative than canon, in a sense. It's an inverse relationship. What I prefer is, how most books only have one author, and how most bands only have one person per instrument. That's what I like to see in a game. I like games that are built at the scale of a book and an album. So you have two people for programming. You have one musician, one artist, and level designer, that sort of thing. At that scale, you can go through the game and point to every feature of the game and ascribe a specific name to its authorship. I like that, because the fewer authors you have in a work, the fewer people you have creating something, the more directly you get in contact with one person's mind. And that's basically the closest thing there is to having psychic powers.
It's a good point, yeah. And I think for video games in particular, that's something that's very valuable to have in fiction.
Absolutely. I don't like games that very obviously have a lot of editorial oversight. I don't play pretty much any AAA because the way a AAA game is produced is a lot more like a Hollywood movie in the sense that it becomes so large that there's a need for delegation of tasks, and this leads to redundancy, it leads to bloat, and it also leads to the game tending to resemble other pre-existing games on the market. A AAA studio would have never made an experience even remotely comparable to something like Vanguard's or Cruelty Squad, which are disgusting to look at. I mean, it's like a collage of Ren and Stimpy freeze frames, but at the same time, it is a beautiful, twisted experience that you could not get anywhere else, but from someone who was making something without any oversight whatsoever.
Oh yeah, I will say I actually really love collaborative fiction in some instances, but I don't like it when it's being dictated by bureaucracy and corporate greed and stuff like that.
It's not merely bureaucracy and corporate greed, but there's a certain balance to be struck between paying attention to the internal consistency as laid forth by, say, a set of guiding principles about how the setting works. There's a certain balance to be struck between that and actual authoritative, this is a valid story in this setting and this is not a valid story in this setting.
Yeah.
Izzy?
I think that both sort of have their own pros and cons. I do quite enjoy collaborative works of fiction. Like, as a creator myself, I know how difficult it is to sort of world build on your own, but like having like a solid group of people that are all on the same page and like controlling canon as it is, it makes it a lot easier and actually like a lot better to like bounce ideas off of one another. So I really enjoy that, personally, as someone on the creative side.
I wouldn't say I disagree with that perspective, and I'm not saying I dislike collaborative canon on its own merits.
No, yeah.
I suggest that it's a problem of scale, or an issue of scale, if anything.
Oh, absolutely.
There's a certain... You could draw it probably as a curve of some kind, where there's a peak where the number of collaborators are interacting with each other in such a way that the story grows in a really wonderful way. And then past that point, there's another certain threshold where it becomes more about delegation and management, and there's enough people coming in that they may not really understand the original stuff. Like, if you look at the history of The Simpsons peaked not right at the beginning, but with the second generation of writers who had time to look at the first generation of writers' work and think about, well, how can we take the existing precepts and premises of the setting of The Simpsons and the character interactions and play with them a little more. So it's generally agreed that The Simpsons peaked, and I mean, IMDb I would call general agreement. It generally peaked season 9 or season 10, perhaps.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know. I haven't watched enough of The Simpsons, but I can definitely understand why that would be the case. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So,
all right.
Man, this could be like its whole episode. I feel like just an episode discussing like various types of like levels of collaboration in fiction and how they work and don't work and how they do and don't lend themselves to the fiction, so to say.
Yeah.
So like back to like sort of broad overviews of the podcast. So some interesting questions I'm hoping to raise are, in what ways do alternative elements, fringe, weirder elements of a given work of fiction, whatever they may be, lend themselves to a fictional work in question? And in what ways might it actually hinder it? Because I think, Peter, as you were saying, oftentimes at a certain point, collaborative fiction, collaborative canons can actually be, in many ways, a hindrance. It's not always going... as much as we love experimentation here, like we do have to admit that it's not always going to work.
And there are instances where fiction sort of I wouldn't say breaks down, but becomes more about adherence to prior events than to innovation in its own right. This is part of the reason why, for example, I've lost a lot of interest in fan fiction as the years have gone on, because I don't see much point in, wasting a cool story idea on someone else's setting and characters. There are certainly valid reasons to write fan fiction, but I know that I feel now that it's not for me. I know wasting might be a strong word, but it's how I feel.
No, I get that. I feel the same way for the most part, honestly.
And with you guys' taste in ARGs and collaborative writing, I should also like to say that it's perfectly valid for collaboration to be 5 writers as much as it is 2 programmers, a musician, an artist, and a level designer. It's just as valid. A family can be 10 dads. That's it, just 10 dads and no kids. In a sense, you're still creating an experience for people to interact with. Whether it's, even if reading is a bit more passive, an ARG involves plenty of interaction.
Yeah. Another question I am keen to ask for various works is, what might the authors trying to be accomplish in their usages of less conventional writing methods or media?
Oh, analysis, yes.
And I'm a big fan of death of the author philosophy, which basically says that it doesn't matter what the author's intention was, that anyone's interpretation of a work could still be seen as a legitimate interpretation of it. But at the same time, I think there is value in trying to discern what an author is trying to say in a given work.
Dota 2, I haven't even finished the first Death of the Author.
Fucking hell.
Well, you and I are going to come to heads on that. Bela, because I'm a pretty big fan of authorial intent, and I think that interplay is going to lead to a lot of interesting moments.
Yep, most likely. Yeah, we're definitely not all going to agree about what we talk about on this podcast, but that's just going to make the conversations more interesting, I think.
I mean, that said, I do like coming up with really awful, really funny fan theories, like, what if the mushroom houses in the Smurfs are the adult stage of the Smurf life cycle?
I kind of love that. That's hilarious.
Like, you can picture, like, Papa Smurf, he's on his deathbed, but instead of him dying, they just carry him out, bury him up to his neck, and he metamorphoses into a house.
God.
Yeah, some Junji Ito stuff.
The Smurfs had such loosely connected internal logic to begin with that I feel like that could actually happen, though.
Yes. I like really strange fan theories like that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And, and speaking of how we like or dislike various fiction, I guess, another question to raise is, what is it we do or don't love about the fiction? Simply, what do we like or what don't we like about the fiction we cover? Because it's not all going to be stuff we like. I mean, I can't make you guys come on to an episode to talk about something you don't like, but I certainly intend to be on episodes talking about stuff I don't like, because I think...
I'm here for it.
Yeah, because, I think that even if we don't necessarily like everything we talk about, it's still worth talking about.
Sure.
Of course.
Oh, and then the last question, and this is really what I guess the core of what I'm hoping can be accomplished with this podcast, is how might aspiring authors use these unconventional techniques for their own fiction? What else can be done with them? I mean, a lot of people like to paint gimmicks and sort of weird experimentation in a bad light because oftentimes nothing comes of it and it's literally done just for the sake of trying that gimmick. But that doesn't mean that someone else can't see the value in that and, find an even more strong way to incorporate it.
Well, yeah, a story is, especially written stories, but any kind of story, is remarkably different from most other products in that the story itself is its own source code. You can look at it in order to understand how it's constructed right there in front of you. And so every story contains a tool set for constructing itself.
Yeah, no, definitely. And so you can take tools that were used in that story and help build a story of your own, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's all that art is, if we're really gonna be blunt about it.
All art has a Frankenstein element to it, yes.
Exactly. It's all just a melting pot of things that you've experienced, especially other media you've experienced in your life.
I really hope that most stories aren't constructed by melting things in a pot. That sounds like it would produce a very disjointed story.
It sounds tasty to me.
That sounds tasty. I'm worried I would have trouble following it.
Well, you don't. If you're eating it, then you're not going to be concerned with reading it.
Maybe I would follow it with some liquor.
It's all consumption either way.
Yeah.
Consume product. Consume product.
Yep.
Oh yeah. So another thing I was gonna say.
We're just regular old consumerians.
Yes. So another thing that I've been thinking about too is that. So the subtitle of this podcast, Fictron, is Alternative Fiction Portal. So
Yes.
So it's an alternative fiction portal, a place where we look at and discuss alternative, fringe, new age, strange works of fiction.
Yes.
But I think it could also be an alternative fiction portal. So not just a place to look at different fringe works of fiction, but I'm thinking it could also be a place where we look at fiction itself in different, less conventional ways than most people think about and discuss fiction in general. Because I do have some fairly unconventional thoughts about fiction, and I'm sure that both of you too as well.
I've exchanged most of my strong opinions for strong emotions, yeah. Or the other way around, scratch that, reverse it. I've exchanged most of my strong emotions for strong opinions these days.
Right.
So I'm probably going to be pretty opinionated on fictional analysis. So you're proposing alternative methods of analysis itself. Hmm?
Yeah, or like less conventional methods of analysis that some people might have that are not used as popularly, so to say.
What, like slapping Swiss cheese down on a book and looking at which words show up through the holes?
No, not quite that crazy.
Like a book code.
I like
it's a
that,
book code
though.
governed by Swiss cheese.
Yes.
I mean, who knows? Maybe we will try slapping some Swiss cheese down on a book at some point and see what happens.
I'll do that for every single piece of content we do and see what happens. It'll just be a segment.
Hey, why not? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I remember the first time I encountered the concept of a book code was in, I believe it was in Alan Mendelsohn, The Boy from Mars, a book by Daniel Pinkwater. And this is a children's book released, it must have been well before 1990. And in that book, there is a book which is encoded into like a translation dictionary. But if you read it backwards with a plastic overlay thing, it gives you secrets on how to develop magic powers. And I thought that was quite interesting at the time, and I think that idea has stuck with me a little too long.
Yeah, I think it would have stuck with me too. That's pretty fucking amazing.
A lot of the fiction I read that has influenced me most was stuff I read in second grade. Books among them, my Anna Mirabilis.
That brings up another good point. I personally also think that a lot of what develops people's personal tastes and like how much someone likes a piece of media, I think it has a lot more to do with the person's upbringing and their experience with the media and similar media throughout their lives. I think it has a lot more to do with that than any kind of objective measure of quality you could hope to muster.
Well, it's certainly not going to be genetic, whether you like high fantasy versus low fantasy.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to be about what you encounter. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it does have a lot to do with preferences developed at an early age. So, like, the stuff I read in second grade is things like Feed by M.T. Anderson and Mother of Demons by Eric Flint. And these were books that were, way ahead of, the other kids were reading. But it's certainly in a different direction, too.
Yeah, and, similarly, not exact correspondence, but, I'm not really a huge anime guy. I mean, I'm still thinking we're probably going to talk about animes on this podcast, because certainly there's a lot to appreciate about it. But I'm not personally the biggest fan of it, not for any not for the reason that it's that I think it's bad or anything. I just I don't really care for it much, and I think a big part of that is probably because the time that I was watching it in middle school, I was at a pretty dark place in life, and I think I've just kind of associated it with that in some ways. And likewise, when I encountered Homestuck for the first time, it was like one of the most positive times I can remember in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about sort of a personal founder syndrome type of thing. I remember definitely, where was I gonna... I forget what I was going to say. Sorry.
That's no problem.
What do you think, though? Is he you got any sort of experiences like that?
I think it's kind of fascinating that you say that, because I remember one of the worst times in my life was middle school, and I had this huge Invader Zim phase. And, like,
Oh, boy.
honestly, like, any Jonan Vasquez content, I would, like, immediately, like, eat and consume.
Yeah. No, I can absolutely imagine that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and, like, it's still he still has like such a huge bearing on what my own style is today, and like how I enjoy like writing media. Even the comics I do, I took like the Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, like the way he does like the scribbly sort of like comic panels, and I like incorporated that into my own because it's such an aesthetic, like interesting thing. But
Yes.
a lot of the times, like for the like happiest points of my life, I hardly even remember like what media I was really into.
Oh, see,
I
that's
think that's really fascinating.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's like it's like not only oftentimes is the media that we appreciate very much influenced by our lives, but the way that we choose to internalize that media, it varies from person to person as well. It's a very good point. Like someone might either associate media they were watching at a negative time of their life as like a beacon of light in a bad time, or they could have associations, like direct associations with it that were themselves negative at the time.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was a huge fan of Homestar Runner from 3rd grade until the site's hiatus,
Yes.
and that was probably the single most body of work that I have consumed in its entirety and enjoyed every moment of it. And even though it stayed the same and I've grown up, I can go back and watch it, and it's still funny. It's still really good.
Yep. Oh, that reminds me. I want to do an episode of nostalgia at some point. There's so much to be said about nostalgia and fiction.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
That totally reminds me. What were they called? Abridged series, like just anime abridged series in general. I was so into it, like all throughout childhoods, and I don't think they hold up as well, but like I remember going back a few years ago and like having a marathon of them and still enjoying them.
Absolutely, and
What a dirty firework.
I think abridged series are also like another category of media under the sort of same umbrella as like YouTube poops and montage parodies, like remixing source material to your own ends. I love that.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I recalled what I was going to say is that the first anime I ever watched was Zoid's Chaotic Century, which was on, I believe, Toonami, and I was about 4.
Oh, I remember Toonami.
I only remember a few scenes from that show, but they still softly call in my brain. I might like to go back and watch that show eventually. I had a bunch of the Zoids toys, and so definitely there is a strong link, I think, between discovering something early and remembering it more fondly. And nowadays I've watched so much isekai garbage that I can predict all the plot beats, and it very clearly occupies a very limited space, but it's still comfy.
I can understand that, absolutely. I mean, just earlier, like yesterday and earlier today, I was watching some of the like old like direct to DVD Scooby-Doo films. Like today, like an hour before the podcast started, I just finished watching Scooby-Doo and the Cyber Chase or whatever. And
I love the baseball scene for whatever reason. I love the baseball scene.
Yeah, and it's all just so formulaic and predictable. I think Scooby-Doo's become one of the most formulaic franchises ever, but I love it.
Yeah. That reminds me of what does that remind me? So they go into a video game in that movie, right? So I think one of the earliest instances I can remember of wanting to be a game developer was there was a Boxcar Children book. Do you remember the Boxcar Children? Yeah, I had all 106.
Jesus, holy shit.
Yeah. Although one of my best friends from middle school, his big brother had an entire bookshelf devoted to like Animorphs, and that blew my mind. But I had all of the Boxcar Children books, and in one of them there is a mystery stored in a video game, and I remember the climactic part of the mystery involved, they can't find the ring item in the video game, but it's actually like you have to circle an item with the mouse in order to activate it, and it's like, well, this isn't a mystery, this is just bad game design. But it got me thinking, like, well, this isn't a game. In the story, this wasn't even a game that had been released or something, if I recall correctly. and they're playing it on like an old IBM PC or whatever. This is some kind of personal project thing left for the family, and it's like, so one person was able to make a game like that, and that really got me thinking.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of like Petscop.
Oh God. Yeah, I haven't nearly seen enough of that, and I'm frankly, from what I've seen of it, it's not like, how do I say this? It's clickbait tier, like it's designed to create clickbait.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough.
Hey, whatever though. I do like mysteries presented in games. I do like when games have really weird, strange, absurd, like, how did this happen, or how are you supposed to solve this? I love those channels that talk about, unsolved Easter eggs and weird, strange mysteries and hidden developer comments. I love that stuff. Because it's all about how the author engages with the medium in ways other than the direct route.
Right. Yeah, it's good shit.
Definitely.
So I guess I would also just say, like, regards to when I was talking about how I've got some fairly unconventional ideas about fiction and how
yes,
I thought about fiction analysis in different ways. Not that I don't value traditional fiction analysis, I do, but I think that there's something interesting to be said about analyzing fiction in different ways as well. What I just want to say about that is that some of the episodes might have some of our listeners, I feel like, thinking, wait a minute, I thought this was a fiction podcast. And so for when that happens, I just want to say I can promise everything we discuss on this podcast is going to be at least tangentially related to fiction. And, you may not always agree with the leaps of logic I'm taking. I'm pretty sure even Peter and Izzy won't agree with me, just as, like, we won't always agree with each other on anything. But I'm always going to explain my trains of thought and why I feel a topic is relevant to fiction.
Yes. Okay. So there's an episode of Pinky and the Brain, I believe, where they show the two main characters' internal thought processes. So Pinky is known as, the dumb one, and he's always spouting off non sequiturs, and it's funny to the audience. And Brain is always cold and calculating, but he usually comes to the wrong conclusion or something. So in that one scene, they show their internal thought processes, and in Pinky's case, you see all the connecting thoughts between the input and the output all follow a very neat logical line of conceptual steps. So he's making very logical connections between ideas, but he's only outputting the final result. Whereas in Brain's view, there is basically no logical connection between input and output. And it's, to my recollection, it is essentially a mess. And so Brain is the one who is actually insane, in a sense. Thank you to explain your thought processes when they get a bit too harebrained.
Man, I've got to watch that show sometime. I've heard very good things about it.
Mm-hmm.
Animaniacs episode 1.
That Animaniacs 2.
I haven't seen that still.
I've seen clips, and just like I feel like I would probably love it just from how much meta humor there is. Meta humor is another thing I love very much.
The old stuff or the reboot? Because, well, I'm not here to, dunk on modernity, but okay. The old one, I guess, is the place to start.
Oh, I haven't seen either of them, so.
Really?
No. Yeah, no, I mean, I would start with the old one, I think. I feel like you couldn't appreciate the new one as much unless you had seen the old one.
Yeah.
Do you guys have anything else you want to say?
Nope.
Is he?
I'm excited for fighting. That's it. I'm excited for fighting. That's it.
Fighting? Yeah. No, I think we're going to have a lot of moments where our microphones peak in anger.
Oh, yeah. Completely.
I can't wait to disagree with you guys.
Hopefully not in anger, but I think definitely there's going to be times where we're talking over each other very strongly.
Oh, I hope it's rage. I hope it's complete vitriol.
You're going to have a lot of trouble editing.
Yeah.
Complete rage. Oh, yeah. Thunders of suns,
I want friendships destroyed.
Arrows raining down from the heavens.
Jeez, okay.
I want to inspire disagreement in our listeners.
The podcast is just
a contagious argument.
This podcast is just going to turn into that Big Enough song with the screaming cowboy.
What?
So I guess like what I'll just conclude saying that like this is obviously a pretty ambitious project. Like I've definitely we've all put forth a lot of ideas, and I don't know if I don't know if we'll necessarily be able to make the podcast everything we said it could be. But like, I'm just gonna say once again, this is basically, an introduction overview for what we hope this podcast can become and the kind of things we're interested in discussing on.
Mm-hmm. And let's hope we have some good, like, ambient music in the background to fill a bit of the dead air.
Oh, well, I mean, I'm gonna cut out a lot of the dead air.
It's gonna flow properly.
All right.
Hell yeah.
I'm gonna edit this like a motherfucker, don't you worry. So yeah, with that said, thank you guys for listening. Thank you, Peter and Izzy, for joining me today. It was awesome.
Most definitely. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for having us. Happy to be on board.
Hell yeah. Thank you all so much for listening to this debut episode of Fictron. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the Fictron YouTube channel. Also check out the Fictron website at altficportal.wixsite.com/Fictron. That's altficportal.wixsite.com/Fictron. And be sure to follow us on Twitter at altficportal. You can reach me on Twitter at serrated_M, Izzy at Tombscone, and PDB at peterdanielberg.com. The Fictron theme is composed by yours truly and sung by Lovebirds Music on Fiverr. All social links will be in the description. Thanks again.